Software project management. Software project management is an essential part of software engineering. Projects need to be managed because professional software engineering is always subject to organizational budget and schedule constraints. The project manager's job is to ensure that the software project meets and overcomes these constraints as well as delivering the high quality software. Good management cannot guarantee project success. However, bad management usually results in project failure. The software may be delivered late, cost more than originally estimated, or fail to meet the expectations of customers. The success criteria for project management obviously vary from project to project, but for most projects, important goals are: Number 1, deliver the software to the customer at the agreed time. Number 2, keep overall cost within the budget. Number 3, deliver software that meets the customer's expectation. Number 4, maintain a happy and well-functioning development team. These goals are not unique to software engineering but are the goals of all engineering projects. However, software engineering is different from other types of engineering in a number of ways that make software management particularly challenging. Some of these differences are: the product is intangible. A manager of a shipbuilding or a civil engineering project can see the product being developed. If a schedule slips, the effect on the product is visible. Parts of the structure are obviously unfinished. Software is intangible. It cannot be seen or touched. Software project managers cannot see progress by simply looking at the artifact that is being constructed. Rather, they rely on others produce evidence that they can use to review the progress of the work. Number 2, large software projects are often one-off projects. Large software projects are usually different in some ways from previous projects. Therefore, even managers who have a large body of previous experience may find it difficult to anticipate problems. Furthermore, rapid technologies changes in computers and communications can make a manager's experience obsolete. Lessons learned from previous projects may not be transferable to new projects. Number 3. Software processes are variable and organized specified. The engineering processes for some type of system, such as bridges and buildings, is well understood. However, software processes vary quite significantly from one organization to another, although there has been significant progress in process standardization and improvement. We still cannot reliably predict when a particular software process is likely to lead to development problems. This is especially true when the software project is part of a wider systems engineering project. Because of these issues, it is not surprising that some software projects are late, over budget, and behind schedule. Software systems are often new and technically innovative. Engineering projects, such as new transport systems that are innovative, often also have schedule problems. Given the difficulties involved, it is perhaps remarkable that so many software projects are delivered on time and to budget. It is impossible to write a standard job description for a software project manager. The job varies tremendously depending on the organization and the software product being developed. However, most managers take responsibilities at some stage for some or all of the following activities. Number 1, project planning. Project managers are responsible for planning, estimating, and scheduling project development and assigning people to tasks. They supervise the work to ensure that it is carried out to the required standards and monitor progress to check that the development is on time and within budget. Number 2, reporting. Project managers are usually responsible for reporting on the progress of a project to customers, and to the managers of the company developing the software. They have to be able to communicate at a range of levels from detailed technical information to management summaries. They have to write concise, coherent documents that abstract critical information from detailed project reports. They must be able to present this information during progress reviews. Number 3. Risk management. Project managers have to assess the risks that may affect a project, monitor these risks, and take action when problem arises. Number 4. People management. Project managers are responsible for managing a team of people. They have to choose people for their team and establish ways of working that lead to affect team performance. Number 5. Proposal writing. The first stage in a software project may involve writing proposal to win a contract to carry out an item of work. The proposal describes the objective of the project and how it will be carried out. It usually includes cost and scheduling estimates and justifies why the project contract should be awarded to a particular organization or team. Proposal writing is a critical task as the survival of many software companies depends on having enough proposals accepted and contracts awarded. There can be no set guidelines for this task. Proposal writing is a skill that you acquire through practice and experience. In this lecture, we will focus on risk management and people management. Risk management. Risk management is one of the most important jobs for a project manager. Risk management involves anticipating risks that might affect the project schedule or the quality of the software being developed, and then taking action to avoid these risks. You can think of a risk as something that you would prefer not to have happen. Risk may threaten the project, the software that is being developed, or the organization. There are therefore three related categories of risk. Number 1. Project risk. Risks that affect the project schedule or resources. An example of a project risk is the loss of an experienced designer. Finding a replacement designer with appropriate skills and experience may take a long time, and consequently, the software design will take longer to complete. Number 2. Product risk. Risks that affect the quality or performance of the software being developed. An example of a product risk is the failure of a purchased component to perform as expected. This may affect the overall performance of the software so that it is slower than expected. Number 3. Business risk. Risks that affect the organization developing or procuring the software. For example, a competitor introducing a new product is a business risk. The introduction of a competitive product may mean that the assumptions made about sales of existing software products may be unduly optimistic. Of course, these risk types overlap. If an experienced programmer leaves a project, this can be a project risk because even if they are immediately replaced, the schedule will be affected. It inevitably takes time for a new project member to understand the work that has been done, so they cannot be immediately productive. Consequently, the delivery of the system may be delayed. The loss of a team member can also be a product risk because a replacement may not be as experienced and so could make programming errors. Finally, it can be a business risk because that programmer's experience may be crucial in winning new contracts. You should record the results of the risk analysis in the project planning along with the consequences analysis, which sets out the consequences of the risk for the project, product, and businesses. Effect risk management makes it easier to cope with the problems and to ensure that these do not lead to unacceptable budget or schedule slippage. The specific risks that may affect a project depend on the project and organizational environment in which the software is being developed. However, there are also common risks that are not related to the type of software being developed, and these can occur in any project. Some of these are common risks as shown in figure. Risk management is particularly important for software projects because of the inherent uncertainties that most projects faces. These stem from loosely defined requirements changes due to changes in customer needs, difficulties in estimating the time and resources required for software development, and differences in individual skills. You have to anticipate risk, understand the impact of these risks on the project, the product, and the business, and take steps to avoid these risks. You may need to draw up contingency plans so that if the risks do occur, you can take immediate recovery action. Let's see the examples of common project, product, and business risks as shown in the figure. Staff turnover. Its effect would be on project. Description: experienced staff will leave the project before it is finished. Number 2 risk. Management change. Affect project. There will be a change of organizational management with different priorities. Risk number 3. Hardware unavailability. Affect project. Hardware that is essential for the project will not be delivered on schedule. Risk number 4. Requirements change. Affect project and product. There will be a larger number of changes to the requirements than anticipated. Next risk. Specification delays. Project and product. Specifications of essential interfaces are not available on schedule. Next risk. Size underestimated. Affect project and product. The size of the system has been underestimated. Risk. Case tool underperformance. Affect product. Case tools which support the project do not perform as anticipated. Risk. Technology change. Business effect. The underlying technology on which the system is built is superseded by new technology. Risk. Product competition. Affect business. A competitive product is marketed before the system is completed. An outline of the process of risk management is illustrated in the figure. It involves several stages. Number 1. Risk identification. You should identify possible project, product, and business risk. Number 2. Risk analysis. You should assess the likelihood and consequences of these risks. Number 3. Risk planning. You should make plans to address the risk either by avoiding it or minimizing its effect on the project. Number 4. Risk monitoring. You should regularly assess the risk and your plans for risk mitigation and revise these when you learn more about the risk. You should document the outcomes of the risk management process in a risk management planning. This should include a discussion of the risk faced by the project, an analysis of these risks, and information on how you propose to manage the risk if it seems likely to be a problem. The risk management process is an iterative process that continues throughout the project. Once you have drawn up an initial risk management plan, you monitor the situation to detect emerging risks. As more information about the risk become available, you have to reanalyze the risk and decide if the risk priority has changed. You may then have to change your plans for risk avoidance and contingency management. Risk identification. Risk identification is the first stage of risk management process. It is concerned with identifying the risks that could pose a major threat to the software engineering process, the software being developed, or the development organization. Risk identification may be a team process where a team gets together to brainstorm possible risks. Alternatively, the project manager may simply use his or her experience to identify the most probable or critical risks. As a starting point for risk identification, a checklist of different types of risk may be used. There are at least 6 types of risk that may be included in a risk checklist. Number 1, technology risk. Risks that derive from the software and hardware technologies that are used to develop the system. Number 2, people risk. Risks that are associated with the people in the development team. Number 3, organizational risk. Risks that derive from the organizational environment where the software is being developed. Number 4, tools risk. Risks that derive from the software tools and other support software used to develop the system. Number 5, requirements risk. Risks that derive from changes to the customer requirements and the process of managing the requirements change. Number 6, estimation risk. Risks that derive from the management estimates of the resources required to build the system. This figure gives some examples of possible risks in each of these categories. When you have finished the risk identification process, you should have a long list of risks that could occur and which could affect the product, the process, and the business. You then need to prune this list to a manageable size. If you have too many risks, it is practically impossible to keep track of all of them. Now let's discuss the risk type and possible risks. Number 1, technology. The database used in the system cannot process as many transactions per second as expected, or reusable software components contain defects that mean they cannot be reused as planned. Number 2, people. It is impossible to recruit staff with the skills required, or key staff are ill and unavailable at critical times. Required training for staff is not available. Organizational risk. The organization is reconstructed so that different management are responsible for the project. Organizational financial problems force reduction in the project budget. Tools. The code generated by software code generation tools is inefficient. Software tools cannot work together in an integrated way. Requirements risk. Changes to requirement that require major design rework are proposed. Customers fail to understand the impact of requirement changes. Estimation risk. The time required to develop the software is underestimated. The rate of defect repair is underestimated. The size of the software is underestimated. Risk analysis. During the risk analysis process, you have to consider each identified risk and make a judgment about the probability and seriousness of that risk. There is no easy way to do this. You have to rely on your own judgment and experience of previous projects and the problems that arose in them. It is not possible to make precise numeric assessment of the probability and seriousness of each risk. Rather, you should assign the risk to one of a number of bands. Number 1. The probability of the risk might be assessed as very low, less than 10%, low, 10 to 25%, moderate, 25 to 50%, high 50 to 75%, or very high greater than 75%. Number 2, the effects of the risk might be assessed as catastrophic, threaten the survival of the project. Serious, would cause major delays. Tolerable, delays are within allowed contingency. Or insignificant. You should then tabulate the results of this analysis process using a table ordered according to the seriousness of the risk. This figure illustrates for the risk that we have identified in previous figure. Obviously, the assessment of a probability and seriousness is arbitrary here. To make this assessment, you need detailed information about the project, the process, the development team, and the organization. Of course, both the probability and the assessment of the effects of a risk may change as more information about the risk becomes available and as risk management plans are implemented. Therefore, you should update this table during each iteration of the risk process. Once the risks have been analyzed and ranked, you should assess which of these risks are most significant. Your judgment must depend on a combination of the probability of the risk arising and the effects of that risk. In general, catastrophic risk should always be considered, as should all serious risks that have more than a moderate probability of occurrence. Boehm recommends identifying and monitoring the top 10 risks, but we think that this figure is rather arbitrary. The right number of risks to monitor must depend on the project. It might be 5 or it might be 15. However, the number of risks chosen for monitoring should be manageable. A very large number of risks would simply require too much information to be collected. For this risk identified in figure, it is appropriate to consider the 8 risks that have been catastrophic or serious consequences. Let's discuss the risk types and examples. Risk: organizational financial problems force reduction in the project budget. Probability: low. Effects: catastrophic. It is impossible to recruit staff with the skills required for the project. Probability: high, and effects: catastrophic. Key staff are ill at critical times in the project. Probability: moderate, but effects: serious. Faults in reusable software components have to be repaired before these components are reused. Probability: moderate, effects: serious. Changes to requirements that require major design rework are proposed. Probability: moderate, effect: serious. The organization is restructured so that different management are responsible for the project. Probability: high, and effects are serious. The database used in the system cannot process as many transactions per second as expected. Probability: moderate, and effect: serious. The time required to develop the software is underestimated. Probability is high, and effects are serious. Software tools cannot be integrated. Probability: high, effect: tolerable. Customers fail to understand the impact of requirements change. Probability: moderate, and effect: tolerable. Required training for staff is not available. Probability: moderate, and effect: tolerable. The rate of defect repair is underestimated. Probability: moderate, and effect: tolerable. The size of the software is underestimated. Probability: high, and effect: tolerable. Code generated by code generation tools is inefficient. Probability: moderate, and effect: insignificant. Risk planning. The risk planning process considers each of the key risks that have been identified and develops strategies to manage these risks. For each of the risks, you have to think of actions that you might take to minimize the disruption to the project if the problem identified in the risk occurs. You also should think about information that you might need to collect while monitoring the project so that problems can be anticipated. Again, there is no simple process that can be followed for contingency planning. It relies on judgment and experience of the project manager. As shown in the figure, possible risk management strategies that have been identified for the key risks, such as those that are serious or intolerable, as shown in previous figure. These strategies fall into three categories. Number one, avoidance strategies. Following these strategies means that the probability that the risk will arise will be reduced. An example of a risk avoidance strategy is the strategy for dealing with defective components as shown in the figure. Number 2. Minimization strategies. Following these strategies means that the impact of risk will be reduced. An example of a risk minimization strategy is the strategy for staff illness as shown in the previous figure. Number 3. Contingency planning. Following these strategies means that you are prepared for the worst and have a strategy in place to deal with it. An example of contingency strategy is the strategy for organization financial problems that we have discussed in previous figure. You can see a clear analogy here with the strategy used in critical systems to ensure reliability, security, and safety, where you must avoid, tolerate, or recover from failure. Obviously, it is best to use a strategy that avoids the risk. If this is not possible, you should use a strategy that reduces the chances that the risk will have serious effects. Finally, you should have strategies in place to cope with the risk if it arises. These should reduce the overall impact of a risk on the project or product. Let's discuss the strategies to help manage risks. Number 1. Organizational financial problems. Prepare a briefing document for senior management showing how the project is making a very important contribution to the goals of the business and presenting reasons why cuts to the project budget would not be cost effective. Number 2. Procurement problem. Alert customer to potential difficulties and the possibilities of delays. Investigate buying in components. Number 3. Staff illness. Recognize teams so that there is more overlap of work and people therefore understand each other's job. Number 4. Defective components. Replace potential defective components with budget in components of non reliability. Number 5. Requirements change. Derive traceability information to assess requirements change impact. Maximize information hiding in the design. Number 6. Organizational reconstructing. Prepare a briefing document for senior management showing how the project is making a very important contribution to the goals of the business. Database performance. Investigate the possibility of buying a higher performance database. Underestimate development time. Investigate buying in components. Investigate use of a program generator. Risk monitoring. Risk monitoring is the process of checking that your assumptions about the product, process, and business risk have not changed. You should regularly assess each of the identified risks to decide whether or not that risk is become more or less problem. You should also think about whether or not the effect of the risk have changed. To do this, you have to look at other factors, such as the number of requirements change requests, which give you clues about the risk probability and its effects. These factors are obviously depend on the type of risk. As shown in the figure, some examples of factors that may be helpful in assessing these risk types. You should monitor risk regularly at all stages in a project. At every management review, you should consider and discuss each of the key risks separately. You should decide if the risk is more or less likely to arise and if the seriousness and consequences of the risk have changed. Let's discuss the risk indicators. Risk type, technology. Potential indicators, late delivery of hardware or support software, many reported technology problems. Number 2, people. Poor staff morale, poor relationships among the team members, high staff turnover. Number 3, organizational. Organizational gossip, lack of action by senior management. Number 4, tools. Reluctance by team members to use tools, complaints about case tools, demands for high-powered workstations. Requirements. Many requirements change requests, customer complaints. Estimation. Failure to meet agreed schedule, failure to clear reported defects. Managing people. The people working in a software organization are its greatest asset. It costs a lot to recruit and retain good people, and it is up to the software manager to ensure that the organization gets the best possible return on its investment. In successful companies and economies, this is achieved when people are respected by the organization and are assigned responsibilities that reflect their skills and experience. It is important that software project managers understand the technical issues that influence the work of software development. Unfortunately, however, good software engineers are not necessarily good people managers. Software engineers often have strong technical skills but may lack the softer skills that enable them to motivate and lead a project development team. As a project manager, you should be aware of the potential problems of people management and should try to develop people management skills. In my view, there are four critical factors in people management. Number 1, consistency. People in a project team should all be treated in a comparable way. No one expects all rewards to be identical, but people should not feel that their contribution to the organization is undervalued. Number 2, respect. Different people have different skills and managers should respect these differences. All members of the team should be given an opportunity to make a contribution. In some cases, of course, you will find that people simply don't fit into a team and they cannot continue. But it is important not to jump the conclusion about this at an early stage in the project. Number 3, inclusion. People contribute effectively when they feel that others listen to them and take account of their proposals. It is important to develop a working environment where all views, even those of the most junior staff, are considered. Number 4, honesty. As a manager, you should always be honest about what is going well and what is going badly in the team. You should also be honest about your level of technical knowledge and willing to defer to staff with more knowledge when necessary. If you try to cover up ignorance or problems, you will eventually be found out and will lose the respect of the group. People management, in my view, is something that has to be based on experience rather than learned from a book. Motivating people. As a project manager, you need to motivate the people that work with you so that they contribute to the best of their abilities. Motivation means organizing the work and the working environment to encourage people to work as effectively as possible. If people are not motivated, they will not be interested in the work they are doing. They will work slowly, be more likely to make mistakes, and will not contribute to the broader goals of the team or the organization. To provide this encouragement, you should understand a little about what motivates people. Maslow suggests that people are motivated by satisfying their needs. These needs are arranged in a series of levels, as shown in the figure. The lower levels of this hierarchy represent fundamental needs for food, sleep, and so on, and the need to feel secure in an environment. Social needs are concerned with the need to feel part of a social grouping. Esteem needs represent the need to feel respect by others, and self-realization needs are concerned with personal development. People need to satisfy lower level needs like hunger before the more abstract high level needs. People working in software development organizations are not usually hungry or thirsty or physically threatened by their environment. Therefore, making sure that people's social, esteem, and self-realization needs are satisfied is most important from a management point of view. Number one, to satisfy social needs, you need to give people time to meet their coworkers and provide places for them to meet. This is relatively easy when all of the members of development team work in same place. But increasingly, team members are not located in the same building or even the same town or state. They may work for different organizations or from home most of the time. Social networking systems and teleconferencing can be used to facilitate communications, but my experience with electronic systems is that they are most effective once people know each other. You therefore need to arrange some face-to-face meetings early in the project so that people can directly interact with other members of the team. Through this direct interaction, people become part of a social group and accept the goals and priorities of the group. Number two, to satisfy esteem needs, you need to show people that they are valued by the organization. Public recognition of achievements is a simple yet effective way of doing this. Obviously, people must also feel that they are paid at a level that reflects their skills and experience. Number three, finally, to satisfy self-realization needs, you need to give people responsibilities for their work, assign them demanding but not impossible tasks, and provide a training program where people can develop their skills. Training is an important motivating influence as people like to gain new knowledge and learn new skills. This figure illustrates a problem of motivation that managers often have to face. In this example, a competent group member loses interest in the work and in the group as a whole. The quality of her work falls and becomes unacceptable. This situation has to be dealt with quickly. If you don't sort out the problem, the other group members will become dissatisfied and feel that they are doing an unfair share of work. In this example, Alice tries to find out if Dorothy's personal circumstances could be the problem. Personal difficulties commonly affect motivation because people cannot concentrate on their work. You may have to give them time and support to resolve their issues, although you also have to make it clear that they still have a responsibility to their employer. Dorothy's motivation problem is one that is quite common when projects develop in an unexpected direction. People who expect to do one type of work may end up doing something completely different. This becomes a problem when team members want to develop their skills in a way that is different from that taken by the project. In those circumstances, you may decide that the team member should leave the team and find opportunities elsewhere. In this example, However, Alice decides to try to convince Dorothy that broadening her experience is a positive career step. She gives Dorothy more design autonomy and organizes training courses in the software engineering that will give her more opportunities after her current project has finished. Maslow's model of motivation is helpful up to a point, but I think that a problem with it is that it takes an exclusively personal viewpoint on motivation. It does not take adequate account of the fact that people feel themselves to be part of organization, a professional group, and one or more cultures. This is not simply a question of satisfying social needs. People can be motivated through helping a group achieve shared goals. Being a member of a cohesive group is highly motivating for most people. People with fulfilling jobs often like to go to work because they are motivated by the people they work with and the work that they do. Therefore, as well as thinking about individual motivation, you also have to think about how a group as a whole can be motivated to achieve the organization's goal. Personality type also influences motivation. Bass classifies professionals into three types. Number one, task oriented people who are motivated by the work they do. In software engineering, these are people who are motivated by the intellectual challenge of software development. Number two, self oriented people who are principally motivated by personal success and recognition. They are interested in software development as a means of achieving their own goals. This does not mean that these people are selfish and think only of their own concerns. Rather, they often have longer term goals such as career progression that motivate them, and they wish to be successful in their work to help realize these goals. Number three, interaction oriented people who are motivated by the presence and actions of coworkers. As software development becomes more user centered, interaction oriented individuals are become more involved in software engineering. Interaction oriented personalities usually like to work as part of a group, whereas task oriented and self oriented people usually prefer to act as individuals. Women are more likely to be interaction oriented than men. They are often more effective communicators. Each individual's motivation is made up of elements of each class, but one type of motivation is usually dominant at any one time. However, individuals can change. For example, technical people who feel they are not being properly rewarded can become self-oriented and put personal interest before technical concerns. If a group works particularly well, self-oriented people can become more interaction-oriented. Teamwork. Most professional software is developed by project teams that range in size from 2 to several hundred people. However, as it is clearly impossible for everyone in a large group to work together on a single problem, large teams are usually split into a number of groups. Each group is responsible for developing part of the overall system. As a general rule, software engineering project groups should not have more than 10 members. When small groups are used, communication problems are reduced. Everyone knows everyone else, and the whole group can get around a table for a meeting to discuss the project and the software that they are developing. Putting together a group that has the right balance of technical skills, experience, and personalities is a critical management task. However, successful groups are more than simply a collection of individuals with the right balance of skills. A good group is cohesive and has a team spirit. The people involved are motivated by the success of the group as well as by their own personal goals. In a cohesive group, members think of the group as more important than the individuals who are group members. Members of a well-led cohesive group are loyal to the group. They identify with group goals and the other group members. They attempt to protect the group as an entity from outside interference. This makes the group robust and able to cope with the problems and unexpected situations. The benefits of creating a cohesive group are: number one, the group can establish its own quality standards because these standards are established by consensus. They are more likely to be observed than external standards imposed on the group. Number two, individuals learn from and support each other. People in the group learn from each other. Inhibitions caused by ignorance are minimized as mutual learning is encouraged. Number three, knowledge is shared. Continuity can be maintained if a group member leaves. Others in the group can take over critical tasks and ensure that the project is not unduly disrupted. Number four, refactoring and continual improvement is encouraged. Group members work collectively to deliver high quality results and fix problems, irrespective of the individuals who originally created the design or problem. Good project managers should always try to encourage group cohesiveness. They may organize social events for group members and their families, try to establish a sense of group identity by naming the group and establishing a group identity and territory, or they may get involved in explicit group building activities such as sports and games. One of the most effective ways of promoting cohesion is to be inclusive. This means that you should treat group members as responsible and trustworthy and make information freely available. Sometimes managers feel that they cannot reveal certain information to everyone in the group. This inevitably creates a climate of mistrust. Some information exchange is an effective way of making people feel valued and that they are part of a group. You can see an example of this in the case study in figure. Alice arranges the regular informal meeting where she tells the other group members what is going on. She makes a point of involving people in the product development by asking them to come up with the new ideas derived from their own family experience. The away days are also good ways of promoting cohesion. People relax together while they help each other learn about new technologies. Whether or not a group is effective depends to some extent on the nature of the project and the organization doing the work. If an organization is in a state of turmoil with constant reorganizations and job insecurity, it is very difficult for team members to focus on software development. However, apart from project and organizational issues, there are three generic factors that affect team working. Number one, the people in the group. You need a mix of people in a project group as software development involves diverse activities such as negotiating with client, programming, testing, and documentation. Number two, the group organization. A group should be organized so that individuals can contribute to the best of their abilities and tasks can be completed as expected. Number three, technical and managerial communications. Good communications between group members and between the software engineering team and other project stakeholders are essential. As with all management issues, getting the right team cannot guarantee project success. Too many other things can go wrong, including changes to the business and the business environment. However, if you don't pay attention to group composition, organization, and communication, you increase likelihood that your project will run into difficulties. Selecting group members. A manager or team leader's job is to create a cohesive group and organize their group so that they can work together effectively. This involves creating a group with the right balance of technical skills and personalities and organizing that group so that the members work together effectively. Sometimes people are hired from outside the organization. More often, however, software engineering groups are put together from current employees who have experience on other projects. However, managers rarely have a completely free hand in team selection. They often have to use the people who are available in the company, even when they may not be the ideal people for the job. Many software project engineers are motivated primarily by their work. Software development groups, therefore, are often composed of people who have their own ideas about how technical problems should be solved. This is reflected in regularly reported problems of interface standard being ignored, system being redesigned as they are coded, unnecessary system embellishments, and so on. A group that has complementary personalities may work better than a group that is selected solely on technical ability. People who are motivated by the work are likely to be the strongest technically. People who are self-oriented will probably be the best at pushing the work forward to finish the job. People who are interaction oriented help facilitate communications within the group. I think that it is particularly important to have interaction oriented people in a group. They like to talk to people and can detect tensions and disagreements at an early stages before these have a serious impact on the group. In the case study as shown in figure, I have suggested how Alice, the project manager, has tried to create a group with complementary personalities. This particular group has a good mix of interaction and task-oriented people. As in the previous case study, Dorothy's self-oriented personality has caused problems because she has not been doing the work that she expected. Fred's part-time role in the group as a domain expert might also be a problem. He is mostly interested in technical challenges, so he may not interact well with other group members. The fact that he is not always part of the team means that he may not relate well to the team's goals. It is sometimes impossible to choose a group with complementary personalities. If this is the case, the project manager has to control the group so that individual goals do not take precedence over organizational and group objectives. This control is easier to achieve if all group members participate in each stage of the project. Individual initiative is most likely when group members are given instructions without being aware of the part that their task plays in the overall project. For example, say a software engineer is given a program designed for coding and notices what appears to be possible improvements that could be made to the design. If he or she implements these improvements without understanding the rationale for the original design, any changes, though well intentioned, might have adverse implications for other parts of the system. If all the members of the group are involved in the design from the start, they will understand why design decisions have been made. They may then identify with these decisions rather than oppose them. Group organization. The way that a group is organized affects the decisions that are made by the group, the ways that information is exchanged, and the interaction between development group and external project stakeholders. Important organizational questions for project managers include: Number 1. Should the project manager be technical leader of the group? The technical leader or system architect is responsible for the critical technical decision made during software development. Sometimes the project manager has the skill and experience to take on this role. However, for large projects, it is best to appoint a senior engineer to be the project architect who will take responsibilities for technical leadership. Number 2, who will be involved in making critical technical decisions and how will these be made? Will decisions be made by the system architect, the project manager, or by reaching consensus amongst a wide range of team members? Number 3. How will interactions with external stakeholders and senior company management be handled? In many cases, the project manager will be responsible for these interactions, assisted by the system architect if there is one. However, an alternative organizational model is to create a dedicated role concerned with the external liaison and appoint someone with appropriate interaction skills to that role. Number 4. How can groups integrate people who are not collocated? It is now common for groups to include members from different organizations and people to work from home as well as in a shared office. This has to be taken into account in group decision making processes. Number 5. How can knowledge be shared across the group? Group organization affects information sharing as certain methods of organization are better for sharing than others. However, you should avoid too much information sharing as people become overloaded and excessive information distracts them from their work. Small programming groups are usually organized in a fairly informal ways. The group leader gets involved in the software development with the other group members. In an informal group, the work to be carried out is discussed by the group as a whole, and tasks are allocated according to the ability and experience. More senior group members may be responsible for the architectural design. However, detailed design and implementation is the responsibility of the team member who is allocated to a particular task. Extreme programming groups are always informal groups. XP enthusiasts claim that the formal structure inhibits information exchange. In XP, many decisions that are usually seen as management decisions, such as decisions on schedule, are devolved to group members. Programmers work together in pairs to develop code and take joint responsibilities for the programs that are developed. Informal groups can be very successful, particularly when most group members are experienced and competent. Such a group make decisions by consensus, which improve cohesiveness and performance. However, if a group is composed mostly of inexperienced or incompetent members, informality can be a hindrance because no defined authority exists to direct the work, causing a lack of coordination between group members and possibly eventually project failure. Hierarchical groups are groups that have a hierarchical structure with the group leader at the top of the hierarchy. He or she has more formal authority than the group members and so can direct their work. There is clearly organizational structure and decisions are made toward the top of the hierarchy and implemented by people lower down the hierarchy. Communications are primarily instructions from senior staff and there is relatively little upward communication from the lower levels of the upper levels in the hierarchy. This approach can work well when a well understood problem can be easily broken into subproblems with subproblem solutions developed in different parts of the hierarchy. In those situations, relatively little communication across the hierarchy is required. However, such situations are relatively rare in software engineering for the following reasons. Number 1. Changes to the software often require changes to several parts of the system, and this requires discussion and negotiation at all levels in the hierarchy. Number 2. Software technologies change so fast that more junior staff often know more about the technology than experienced staff. Top-down communication may mean that the project manager does not find out about the opportunities of using new technologies. More junior staff may become frustrated because of what they see as old-fashioned technologies being used for development. Democratic and hierarchical group organizations do not formally recognize that there may be very large differences in technical ability between group members. The best programmer may be up to 25 times more productive as worst programmers. It makes sense to use the best people in most effective way and to provide them with as much support as possible. An early organizational model that was intended to provide this support was the chief programmer team. To make the most effective use of highly skilled programmers, Baker and the others suggested that team should be built around an individual, highly skilled chief programmer. The underlying principle of the chief programmer team is that skilled and experienced staff should be responsible for all software development. They should not be concerned with routine matters and should have good technical and administrative support for their work. They should focus on the software to be developed and not spend a lot of time in external meetings. However, the chief programmer team organization is, in my view, over-dependent on the chief programmer and their assistant. Other team members who are not given sufficient responsibility may become demotivated because they feel their skills are underused. They do not have the information to cope if things go wrong and are not given the opportunity to participate in decision making. There are significant project risks associated with this group organization, and they may outweigh any benefits that this kind of organization might bring. Group communications. It is absolutely essential that group members communicate effectively and efficiently with each other and with other project stakeholders. Group members must exchange information on the status of their work, the design decisions that have been made, and changes to previous design decisions. They have to resolve problems that arise with other stakeholders and inform these stakeholders of changes to the system, the group, and the delivery plans. Good communication also helps strengthen group cohesiveness. Group members come to understand the motivations, strengths, and weaknesses of other people in the group. The effectiveness and efficiency of communication is influenced by number 1. Group size. As a group gets bigger, it gets harder for members to communicate effectively. The number of one-way communication links is n multiply n minus 1, where n is the group size. So, with a group of 8 members, there are 56 possible communications pathways. This means that it is quite possible that some people will rarely communicate with each other. Status differences between group members mean that communications are often one way. Managers and experienced engineers tend to dominate communication with less experienced staff, who may be reluctant to start a conversation or make critical remarks. Number 2, group structure. People in informally structured groups communicate more effectively than people in groups with formal hierarchical structure. In hierarchical group, communications tend to flow up and down the hierarchy. People at the same level may not talk to each other. This is particularly problem in a large project with several development groups. If people working on different subsystems only communicate through their managers, then there are more likely to be delays and misunderstandings. 3. Group composition. People with same personality types may clash, and as a result, communication can be inhibited. Communication is also usually better mixed sex groups than a single sex group. Women are often more interaction oriented than men and may act as interaction controller and facilitator for the group. Number 4, the physical work environment. The organization of the workplace is a major factor in facilitating or inhibiting communications. Number 5, the available communication channels. There are many different forms of communication: face to face, email messages, formal documentations, telephone, and web technologies such as social networking, wikis. As project teams become increasingly distributed with team members working remotely, you need to make use of a range of technologies to facilitate communications. Project managers usually work to tight deadlines and consequently they may try to use communication channels that don't take up too much of their time. They may therefore rely on meeting and formal documents to pass on information to project staff and stakeholders. Although this may be an efficient approach to communication from a project manager's perspective, it is not usually very effective. There are often good reasons why people can't attend meetings and so they don't hear the presentation. Long documentations are often never read because readers don't know if the documents are relevant. When several versions of the same document are produced, readers find it difficult to keep track of changes. Effective communication is achieved when communications are two-way and the people involved can discuss issues and information and establish a common understanding of proposals and problems. This can be done through meetings, although they are often dominant by powerful personalities. It is sometimes impractical to arrange meetings at short notice. More and more project teams include remote members, which also makes meeting more difficult. To counter these problems, you make use of web technologies such as wikis and blogs to support information exchange. Wikis support the collaborative creation and editing of documents, and blogs support threaded discussion about questions and comments made by group members. Wikis and blogs allow project members and external stakeholders to exchange information irrespective of their location. They help manage information and keep track of discussion threads, which often become confusing when conducted by email. You can also use instant messaging and teleconferences, which can be easily arranged to resolve issues that need discussion. Project planning. Project planning is one of the most important jobs of a software project manager. As a manager, you have to break down the work into parts and assign these to project team members. Anticipate problems that might arise and prepare tentative solutions to those problems. The project plan, which is created at the start of a project, is used to communicate how the work will be done to the project team and customers and to help assess progress on the project. Project planning takes place at three stages in the project life cycle. Number one, at the personal stage, when you are bidding for a contract to develop or provide a software system. You need a plan at this stage to help you decide if you have the resources to complete the work and to work out the price that you should quote to a customer. Number two, during the project startup phase, when you have to plan who will work on the project, how the project will be broken down into increments, how resources will be allocated across your company, etc. Here you have more information than at the proposal stage and can therefore refine the initial efforts estimates that you have prepared. Periodically throughout the project, when you modify your plan in light of experience gained and information from monitoring the progress of the work, you learn more about the system being implemented and capabilities of your development team. This information allows you to make more accurate estimates of how long the work will take. Furthermore, the software requirements are likely to change, and this usually means that the work breakdown has to be altered and the schedule extended. For traditional development projects, this means that the plan created during the startup phase has to be modified. However, when an agile approach is used, plans are shorter term and continually change as the software evolves. Planning at the proposal stage is inevitably speculative, as you do not usually have a complete set of requirements for the software to be developed. Rather, you have to respond to a call for proposal based on high-level description of the software functionality that is required. A plan is often required part of a proposal, so you have to produce a credible plan for carrying out the work. If you win the contract, you then usually have to replan the project taking into account changes since the proposal was made. When you are bidding for a contract, you have to work out the price that you will propose to the customer for developing the software. As a starting point of calculating the price, you need to draw up an estimate of your cost for completing the project work. Estimation involves working out how much effort is required to complete each activity and from this calculating the total cost of activities. You should always calculate software cost objectively with the aim of accurately predicting the cost of developing the software. Once you have a reasonable estimate of the likely cost, you are then in a position to calculate the price that you will quote to the customer. Many factors influence the pricing of the software project. It is not simply cost plus profit. There are three main parameters that you should use when computing the cost of a software development project. Effort cost, the cost of paying software engineers and managers. Hardware and software cost, including maintenance, travel and training costs. For most projects, the biggest cost is the effort cost. You have to estimate the total effort in person months that is likely to be required to complete the work of a project. Obviously, you have limited information to make such an estimate, so you have to make the best possible estimate and then add significant contingency, extra time and effort in case your initial estimate is optimistic. For commercial systems, you normally use commodity hardware which is relatively cheap. However, software cost can be significant if you have to license middleware and platform software. Extensive travel may be needed when a project is developed at different sites, although travel costs themselves are usually a small fraction of the effort cost. The time spent traveling is often wasted and adds significantly to the effort cost of the project. Electronic meeting systems and other software that supports remote collaboration can reduce the amount of travel required. The time saved can be devoted to more productive project work. Once a contract to develop a system has been awarded, the outline project plan for the project has to be defined to create project startup plan. At this stage, you should know more about the requirements for this system. However, you may not have a complete requirements specification, especially if you are using an agile approach to development. Your aim at this stage should be to create a project plan that can be used to support decision making about project staffing and budgeting. You use the plans as a basis for allocating resources to the project from within the organization and to help decide if you need to hire new staff. The plan should also define project monitoring mechanisms. You must keep track of the progress of the project and compare actual and planned progress and costs. Although most organizations have formal procedures for monitoring, a good manager should be able to form a clear picture of what is going on through informal discussions with project staff. Informal monitoring can predict potential project problems by revealing difficulties as they occur. For example, daily discussions with project staff might reveal a particular problem in finding a software fault rather than waiting for a scheduled slippage to be reported. The project manager could then immediately assign an expert to the problem or decide the program around it. The project plan always evolves during the development process. Development planning is intended to ensure that the project plan remains a useful document for staff to understand what is to be achieved and when it is to be delivered. Therefore, the schedule, cost estimate, and risk all have to be revised as the software is developed. If an agile method is used, there is still a need for a project startup plan, as regardless of the approach used, the company still needs to plan how resources will be allocated to a project. However, this is not a detailed plan and schedule include only limited information about the work breakdown and project schedule. During development and informal project plan and effort estimates are drawn up for each release of the software, with the whole team involved in the planning process. Software pricing. In principle, the price of a software product to a customer is simply the cost of development plus profit for the developer. In practice, however, the relationship between the project cost and the price quoted to the customer is not usually so simple. When the calculating a price, you should take broader organizational, economic, political, and business considerations into account, such as those shown in the figure. You need to think about organizational concerns, the risks associated with the project, and the type of contract that will be used. They may cause the price to be adjusted upwards or downwards because of the organizational consideration involved. Decision on a project price should be a group activity involving marketing and sales staff, senior management, and project managers. To illustrate some of the project pricing issues, consider the following scenario. A small software company, PharmaSoft, employs 10 software engineers. It has just finished a large project but only has contracts in place that require 5 development staff. However, it is bidding for a very large contract with a major pharmaceutical company that requires 30% year of efforts over 2 years. The project will not start for at least 12 months, but if granted, it will transform the finances of the company. PharmaSoft gets an opportunity to bid on a project that requires 6 people and has to be completed in 10 months. The cost, including overheads, of this project are estimated at 1.2 million. However, to improve its competitive position, PharmaSoft decided to bid a price to the customer of 0.8 million. This means that although it loses money on this contract, it can retain specialist staff for the more profitable future projects that are likely to come on stream in a year's time. As the cost of a project is only loosely related to the price quoted to a customer, pricing to win is a commonly used strategy. Pricing to win means that a company has some idea of the price that the customer expects to pay and make a bid for the contract based on the customer's expected price. This may seem unethical and unbusinesslike, but it does have advantage for both the customer and the system provider. A project cost is agreed on the basis of an outline proposal. Negotiations then take place between client and the customer to establish the detailed project specification. This specification is constrained by the agreed cost. The buyer and the seller must agree on what is acceptable system functionality. The fixed factor in many projects is not the project requirement but the cost. The requirements may be changed so that the cost is not exceeded. For example, say a company, Oilsoft, is bidding for a contract to develop a fuel delivery system for an oil company that schedules deliveries of fuel to its service stations. There is no detailed requirements document for the system, so Oilsoft estimate that the price is 900,000 is likely to be competitive and with the oil company's budget. After they are granted the contract, Oilsoft then negotiates the detailed requirements of the system so that basic functionality is delivered. They then estimate the additional cost for the requirements. The oil company does not necessarily lose here because it has awarded the contract to a company that it can trust. The additional requirements may be funded from a future budget so that the oil company's budgeting is not disrupted by a high initial software cost. Let's discuss the factors affecting software pricing as shown in the figure. Number 1. Market opportunity. Description: a development organization may quote a low price because it wishes to move into a new segment of the software market. Accepting a low profit on one project may give the organization the opportunity to make a greater profit later. The experience gained may also help it to develop new products. Cost estimate uncertainty. If an organization is unsure of its cost estimate, it may increase its price by a contingency over and above its normal profit. Contractual terms. A customer may be willing to allow the developer to retain ownership of the source code and reuse it in other projects. The price change may then be less than if the software source code is handed over to the customer. Requirements volatility. If the requirements are likely to change, an organization may lower its price to win a contract. After the contract is awarded, high prices can be charged for changes to the requirements. Financial health. Developers in financial difficulty may lower their price to gain a contract. It is better to make a smaller than normal profit or break even than to go out of business. Cash flow is more important than profit in difficult economic times. Plan driven development. Plan driven or plan based development is an approach to software engineering where the development process is planned in detail. A project plan is created that records the work to be done, who will do it, the development schedule, and the work products. Managers use the plan to support project decision making and as a way of measuring progress. Plan driven development is based on engineering project management techniques and can be thought of as the traditional way of managing large software development projects. This contrasts with agile development, where many decisions affecting the development are delayed and made later, as required during the development process. The principal argument against plan-driven development is that many early decisions have to be revised because of changes to the environment in which the software is to be developed and used. Delaying such decisions are sensible because it avoids unnecessary rework. The arguments in favor of a plan-driven approach are that early planning allows organizational issues, availability of staff, other projects and etc. to be closely taken into account and that potential problems and dependencies are discovered before the project starts rather than once the project is underway. In my view, the best approach to project planning involves a judicious mixture of plan-based and agile development. The balance depends on the type of project and skills of the people who are available. At one extreme, large security and safety critical systems requires extensive upfront analysis and may have to be certified before they are put into use. These should be mostly plan driven. At the other extreme, small to medium-sized information systems to be used in a rapidly changing competitive environment should be mostly agile, where several companies are involved in a development project. A plan-driven approach is normally used to coordinate the work across each development site. Project plans. In a plan-driven development project, a project plan sets out the resources available to the project, to work breakdown, and a schedule for carrying out the work. The plan should identify risk to the project and the software under development, and the approach that is taken to risk management. Although the specific details of project plans vary depending on the type of project and organization, plans normally include the following sections. Number 1. Introduction. This briefly describes the objectives of the project and set out the constraints, such as budget, time, etc., that affect the management of the project. Number 2. Project organization. This describes the way in which the development team is organized, the people involved, and their roles in the team. Number 3. Risk analysis. This describes possible project risks, the likelihood of these risks arising, and the risk reduction strategies that are proposed. Number 4. Hardware and software resource requirements. This specifies the hardware and support software required to carry out the development. If hardware has to be bought, estimates of the prices and the delivery schedule may be included. Number 5. Working breakdown. This sets out the breakdown of the project into activities and identifies the milestones and deliverables associated with each activity. Milestones are key stages in the project where progress can be assessed. Deliverables are work products that are delivered to the customer. Number 6. Project schedule. This shows the dependencies between activities, the estimated time required to reach each milestone, and the allocation of people to activities. Number 7. Monitoring and reporting mechanisms. This defines the management reports that should be produced. When these should be produced, the project monitoring mechanism to be used, as well as the principal project plan, which should focus on the risk to be projects and the project schedule. You may develop a number of supplementary plans to support other process activities such as testing and configuration management. Examples of possible supplementary plan are shown in the figure. Let's discuss the project plan supplements. Plan, quality plan. Description. Describes the quality procedures and standards that will be used in a project. Validation plan. Describes the approach, resources, and schedule used for the system validation. Configuration management plan. Describes the configuration management procedures and structures to be used. Maintenance plan predicts the maintenance requirements, cost, and efforts. Staff development plan describes how the skills and experience of the project team members will be developed. The planning process. Project planning is an iterative process that starts when you create an initial project plan during the project startup phase. This figure is a UML activity diagram that shows a typical workflow for a project planning process. Plan changes are inevitable. As more information about the system and the project team becomes available during the project, you should regularly revise the plan to reflect requirements, schedule, and risk changes. Changing business goals also leads to change in project plans. A business goal change. This could affect all projects, which may then have to be replanned. At the beginning of a planning process, you should assess the constraints affecting the project. These constraints are the required delivery date, staff availability, overall budget, available tools, and so on. In conjunction with this, you should also identify the project milestones and deliverables. Milestones are points in the schedule against which you can assess progress. For example, the handover of the system for testing. Deliverables are work products that are delivered to the customers, such as a requirement document for the system. The process then enters a loop. You draw up an estimated schedule for the project, and the activities defined in this schedule are initiated or given permission to continue. After some time, usually above 2 to 3 weeks, you should review progress and note discrepancies from the planned schedule. Because initial estimates of the project parameters are inevitable, approximate minor slippages are normal, and you will have to make modifications to the original plan. It is important to be realistic when you are creating a project plan. Problems of some description nearly always arise during a project, and these can lead to project delays. Your initial assumptions and scheduling should therefore be pessimistic rather than optimistic. There should be sufficient contingency built into your plan so that the project constraints and milestones don't need to be renegotiated every time you go around the planning loop. If there are serious problems with the development work that are likely to lead to significant delays, you need to initiate risk mitigation actions to reduce the risk of the project failure. In conjunction with these actions, you also have to replan the project. This may involve renegotiating the project constraints and deliverables with the customer. A new schedule of when work should be completed also has to be established and agreed with the customer. If this renegotiation is unsuccessful or the risk mitigation actions are ineffective, then you should arrange for a formal project technical review. The objective of this review are to find an alternative approach that will allow the project to continue and to check whether the project and the goals of the customer and the software developer are still aligned. The outcome of a review may be a decision to cancel a project. This may be a result of technical or managerial failing, but more often is a consequence of external changes that affect the project. The development time for a large software project is often several years. During that time, the business objective and the priorities inevitably change. These changes may mean that the software is no longer required or that the original project requirements are inappropriate. Management may then decide to stop software development or to make major changes to the project to reflect the changes in the organizational objective. Project scheduling. Project scheduling is the process of deciding how the work in a project will be organized as separate tasks and when and how these tasks will be executed. You estimate the calendar time needed to complete each task, the effort required, and who will work on the tasks that have been identified. You also have to estimate the resources needed to complete each task, such as the disk space required on a server, the time required on the specialized hardware, such as simulator, and what the travel budget will be. In terms of planning stages, an initial project schedule is usually created during the project startup phase. This schedule is then refined and modified during development planning. Both plan-based and agile processes need an initial project schedule. Although the level of detail may be less in an agile project plan, this initial schedule is used to plan how people will be allocated to projects and to check the progress of the project against its contractual commitments. In traditional development processes, the complete schedule is initially developed and then modified as the project progresses. In agile processes, there has to be an overall schedule that identifies when the major phases of the project will be completed. An iterative approach to scheduling is then used to plan each phase. Scheduling in plan-driven projects involves breaking down the total work involved in a project into separate tasks and estimating the time required to complete each task. Tasks should normally last at least a week and no longer than 2 months. Finer subdivision means that a disproportionate amount of time must be spent on replanning and updating the project plan. The maximum amount of time for any task should be around 8 to 10 weeks. If it takes longer than this, the task should be subdivided for project planning and scheduling. Some of these tasks are carried out in parallel with different people working on different components of the system. You have to coordinate these parallel tasks and organize the work so that the workforce is used optimally and you don't introduce unnecessary dependencies between the tasks. It is important to avoid a situation where the whole project is delayed because a critical task is unfinished. If a project is technically advanced, initial estimates will almost certainly be optimistic even when you try to consider all eventualities. In this respect, software scheduling is no different from scheduling any other type of large advanced project. New aircraft, bridges, and even new models of cars are frequently late because of unanticipated problems. Schedules therefore must be continually updated as better progress information becomes available. If the project being scheduled is similar to a previous project, previous estimates may be reused. However, projects may use different design methods and implementation languages, so experience from previous project may not be applicable in the planning of a new project. As we discussed already, that when you are estimating schedules, you must take into account the possibility that things will go wrong. People working on a project may fall ill or leave, hardware may fail, and essential support software or hardware may be delivered late. If the project is new and technical advance, parts of it may turn out to be more difficult and take longer than originally anticipated. A good rule of thumb is to estimate as if nothing will go wrong, then increase your estimate to cover anticipated problems. A further contingency factor to cover unanticipated problems may also be added to the estimate. This extra contingency factor depends on the type of project, the process parameter, deadline, standards, and the quality and the experience of the software engineers working on the project. Contingency estimates may add 30% to 50% to the effort and the time required for the project. Key points. Good software project management is essential if software engineering projects are to be developed on schedule and within budget. Software management is distinct from other engineering management. Software is intangible. Projects may be novel or innovative, so there is no body of experience to guide their management. Software processes are not as mature as traditional engineering processes. Risk management is now recognized as one of the most important project management tasks. Risk management involves identifying and assessing major project risks to establish the probability that they will occur and the consequences for the project if that risk does arise. You should make plans to avoid, manage, or deal with likely risks if or when they arise. People are motivated by interaction with other people, the recognition of management and their peers, and by being given opportunities for personal development. Software development groups should be fairly small and cohesive. The key factors that influence the effectiveness of a group are the people in that group, the way that it is organized, and the communication between group's members. Communications within a group are influenced by factors such as status of group members, the size of the group, and the gender composition of the group, personalities, and the available communication channels. The price charged for a system does not just depend on its estimated development cost and the profit required by the development company. Organizational factors may mean that the price is increased to compensate for increased risk or decreased to gain competitive advantage. Software is often priced to gain a contract, and the functionality of the system is then adjusted to meet the estimated price. Plan-driven development is organized around a complete project plan that defines a project activity, the planned effort, the activity schedule, and who is responsible for each activity.